Good evening and welcome to Gay Liberation Network's show on CAN TV. Gay Liberation Network is the Chicago area direct action organization focused on LGBT solidarity work with a variety of different organizations throughout the city. And tonight we are going to be talking about immigration, in particular. LGBTs are immigrants, and notably in June, there was a development at the White House that we're going to talk about in a little bit. This evening on our show, we have Megan Davis, one of the attorneys with Justice for Our Neighbors, and we'll be talking about Justice for Our Neighbors a little bit later and the free immigrant and legal services that they provide. In June, our President, Barack Obama, had an event celebrating LGBT Pride, and during that event, which had several hundred people in the White House, Geneset Gutierrez, a trans activist who is also an undocumented immigrant, as I understand, spoke up loudly, calling for an end to the deportations and an end to the detention of our people that this government is carrying out. It was a striking event. It got lots of coverage in social media and television stuff as well, and really calls out the fact that while the president was celebrating the court's decision on nationwide marriage for LGBTs, we still have a long way to go before we are actually providing a great society and a great place for people. So Geneset, there's a campaign, We Stand with Geneset, and Gay Liberation Network very much stands with Geneset as calling out this administration, which has deported a record amount of immigrants to this country, more than 2 million people. People that have chosen to come to this country as a life choice to potentially, for some people, to get away from a place that was not safe for them to be an out gay person. And then this government is terrorizing them by demanding that they leave the country and go back to their place of origin. And so that's awful. Another aspect of what Geneset talked about was detention. And Megan, I think that maybe you can share some more information about that. Tell us, what is detention for immigrants, and what is the kind of overall conversation that's going on about detention?
Absolutely. In immigration, the United States government frequently detains what are called immigration violators. And this can be anybody who gets stopped by immigration, and the agency that enforces this is called ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They frequently will stop people either at the border if they're trying to cross in, at airports if they don't have proper documents, or more common than not, in traffic stops for driving without a license or other non-criminal offenses that trigger that the government can see that the person is undocumented, and then they get put in detention, which is essentially prison, even though immigration is not a criminal matter, it's a civil matter. And so detention facilities are very often mixed in with in different prison populations for LGBT especially, and for trans individuals. There's a lot of violence that occurs. Trans individuals are at higher risk for sexual violence and assault, and until recently, they had been segregated. Somebody who is trans identifying as a trans woman would be put in a male detention population. But recently, the shift, I think, a policy change is to put trans individuals in detention based on their own gender identity, which is one step, but definitely doesn't go far enough into the whole issue of detention in general. These people can be detained for years, depending on what kind of violation they have. They have a certain criminal background. Oh, or if they get released on bond, the bond can be extremely high and difficult for them to pay. So, in general, detention is a huge issue for all undocumented individuals, but LGBT and trans individuals suffer even higher incidence of violence and assault as a result of it.
And so there have been calls on ICE that if you cannot safely detain our population, then do not detain our population. Let us free. And so that, ideally would remain the goal that we have for this. But it is wonderful that just recently there has been an announcement that ICE will be detaining transgendered individuals based on their current gender identity.
That's the policy announcement. We'll see how well they actually enforce this policy going forward. But hopefully it's a positive development.
One of the other elements that I have heard about with detention too is that where you have a policy and then it doesn't get enforced is that medications for chronic illness are supposed to be provided, and some people with HIV have not received their medications, and so you have death occurring, for either from physical violence or from policies not being followed based on discriminatory behavior within the the detention process. And so that's what's getting a lot of protest right now. So we're going to talk about justice for our neighbors for a little bit here. And on your screen, you can see the website for the organization. This is for Justice for Our Neighbors, Northern Illinois. And Megan, tell us more about the work.
Sure. So Justice for Our Neighbors is completely free legal services that we offer to immigrant communities who are at or below the poverty line. And we offer, our services are free, our legal consults are free, and we operate not only in Chicago, but we are in all of Northern Illinois. So we have clients as far as Rockford, some in Northern Indiana, some in Southern Wisconsin, and we're able to really reach a lot of immigrant communities that are very isolated from legal services, and especially free legal services.
And you're taking on cases that are not employer related, but can be, like what are some of the cases that you see, or the type of cases that you take on?
Yeah, JFON, that's the acronym that we use for Justice for Our Neighbors, deals with family-based immigration. That includes families that are petitioning for spouses or children, and to keep their family together, to get visas, to sponsor relatives to come to the United States, to get green cards for their family members. We also have a good deal of asylum cases, which offers protection to people who are fleeing their home country for persecution and other harm that they face if they go back. And other types of visas that are available to victims of trafficking, victims of violence. That's the casework that we deal with.
And it's kind of fascinating that, in society as a whole, the fact that someone may have suffered harm in their history for being a trans person or being bisexual in their country of origin, the immigration system in the U.S. gives them that actually becomes a trump card that they can play in their immigration process to obtain asylum, perhaps, in this country. And so some of the clients that JFON represents are gay men from countries where there are laws against homosexuality, as well as many other cases. So you mentioned the family petition, and there's a bunch of stuff about family detention going on now too. So what is that?
Yes, ever since last summer, where some people might remember that there was a large influx of migrants from Central America that were fleeing mostly gang-related violence, other types of violence in the home country. this was a lot of mothers and children who were coming to the U.S. and getting stopped by immigration at the Mexican border. There was nearly 40,000, if not more, who came last summer because of violence. And in response, the government opened numerous detention facilities for women and children, so mothers and children, where they waited for months to be able to get released. A lot of them still haven't been released and are just waiting because the bonds that the government will set it has been as high as $25,000 or $30,000, which these people clearly cannot pay. So a lot of them been stuck, detained in these facilities that are very isolated. One was in Artesia, New Mexico, which is hours from any large city, from almost any immigration services, and it was extremely difficult for them to be able to get released. Another was in Dilley, Texas, and that one is still open to my knowledge, but there was a very positive development about 2 weeks ago. A federal judge declared that these family detention centers were a breach of a settlement agreement many years ago that basically says that the government can't be detaining children. It doesn't matter if they're children or their mothers, that they cannot, these facilities are not safe, they're overcrowded, the conditions are very deplorable, and so hopefully these centers are going to be shut down very soon if the government enforces the outcome of this decision.
Yeah. Which sounds like music to my ears. I mean, why is our government jailing people who aren't they're not a menace to society. They're not going to they're not generally going to movie theaters and shooting people.
Uh-huh. And the reason to detain people is because they are a threat to public safety, is what the government asserts. And we're talking about a lot of single mothers who are very young and they have 2 or 3 children and they have no criminal background except for the fact that they crossed the border without documents. And it's just absurd that this is their premise for keeping these people essentially jailed without release.
And the number of people arriving, increased dramatically over the last few years, particularly youngsters arriving at the southern border, unaccompanied minors. And we've talked about on this show, we've had some programs on Honduras and the issues going on there. But, it is, from your understanding, what are some of the causes of this and of this migration of people up from Central America?
For children especially, in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, which is called the Northern Triangle, there's an extreme risk for forced gang recruitment because the conditions in these countries they're overrun with criminal gangs and drug trafficking organizations. And young children and teenagers are sought out by these gangs to become part of the organization. Or if they decide they don't want to join, well, then they get threatened with death, or their family members get threatened with death, or they get killed. And that's why so many young children coming on their own, unaccompanied minors refers to children who are under 18 and they come and are apprehended without family members. So they're traveling by themselves. They normally travel in groups with other kids, but they're traveling without a parent or a guardian. And I've had clients who have come from Honduras and they're 13, 14, 15 years old and we're getting threatened. And that's why we call this a humanitarian crisis, because a lot of these kids coming, and mothers and other people coming in general, are coming here because they fear for their lives and their safety.
Mm-hmm. We have some pictures. Justice for Our Neighbors, as well as Gay Liberation Network, is also called to advocate for change, systemic change. And so there's some pictures here of the director of Justice for Our Neighbors National, which, by the way, these services are provided in various parts of the country, not just in the Chicago area. And he is getting arrested here in a civil disobedience action. And there's another picture on your screen. What Gay Liberation Network and our work with LGBT activists, particularly in Honduras, has found is that a lot of the reason why these gangs are so strong in the Northern Triangle, as you called it, Megan, is that the governments, particularly in Honduras, has chosen to be a government for the 1%, and it has gone through a process of removing land rights for small farmers on small plots of land and transferring title of those properties to large, very rich corporations and individuals who run those who run those lands on a much larger scale, and in a variety of ways are just doing many things to enforce and increase corporate growth and greed in the countries, and not necessarily full employment of the population. And so these are some of the things that we advocate to change, and we work with, Gay Liberation Network works with Justice for Our Neighbors, as well as other organizations, to try to bring about that change in Central America, so that we don't just provide immigration services for people that are fleeing, but also that we are advocating to make change so that life is better for people everywhere around the world. Honduras has become the murder capital of the world in the last since 2009, when there was a coup, which this administration, particularly under former Secretary of State Clinton, denied was a coup, even though our plane was, a U.S. aircraft was used to remove the president from the country, and we need to call out the actions of former Secretary of State Clinton on that, because if there is a coup, there are certain restrictions and elements that are brought in to keep the new government that is in place that was formed under a coup from harming the people, and those restrictions aren't in place right now because our U.S. government has recognized that coup government as being legitimate. So there's big backstories on all of this. The child arrivals. When I first heard about all this, I was just amazed at the youth of these individuals coming, and there were lots of questions in my mind. I just want to share, if I may. Here in Jefferson Park, there is on the northwest side, there is a plaque to one of the leaders of the community back in the early 1900s. And this man came from Prussia as a 14-year-old with his younger brother, unaccompanied. So it is not earth-shattering that young people are coming to this country. What is earth-shattering is the sheer number of people and the fact that they are arriving in droves, from places that could be better if the United States would take different actions towards it. Family detention we talked about is now going is not.
We hope that it's going to be phased out. When Artesia, the New Mexico facility that was notoriously opened last summer, closed down, they basically relocated the detainees to Dilley, Texas, and I believe there's a couple other detention facilities still open. So if the government takes actually enforces what it's supposed to be enforcing based on this outcome, this decision by the judge, then we're hopefully seeing an end to these detention facilities and mothers and children being released. as they should be, so they can await, because a lot of the people in these facilities have very credible claims to get protection in the U.S., either with asylum or other remedies available to them. So there's really no benefit to them being locked away. And truly, we're paying billions of dollars on immigration deportation, notwithstanding the detention centers. So it's just a broken system. It really is. But hopefully it will be changing.
In some of these folks, we're talking about they're crossing at the southern border, and then some of them are being detained in Texas, but there are many in the Chicago area too, which tell us about that. Like, is it through relatives,
Yeah.
or how do they get up here?
So when children are stopped by immigration and coming, through Texas, Arizona, or any of the border states, and they get put into a detention facility specific to children there, with a specific agency called the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So they're not detained with adults; they're detained with other kids their age. If they have a sponsor, such as a parent or a relative, a brother or sister, elsewhere in the United States, they can be reunited with that relative or guardian and released and then sent to wherever the parent or sponsor is living. So there's a lot of children who came through the border, were detained in Texas, or another state, and then eventually reunited with family that is living in the Chicago area. So that's how we've ended up with, we have at least 500 in the Chicago area as of last year. If more are coming this year, then we expect to have numbers up again. Hopefully not as high, but yeah, we have quite a large community of them coming to this area.
And Justice for Our Neighbors is representing many of these childhood arrivals that are in the Chicago area, as well as we have sent people to the southern border. You can support Justice for Our Neighbors in our work and come and learn more about this at our annual fundraising dinner. We're going to have the author of The Littlest Wetback at the dinner.
It's a great title. He's a great judge. He came to our dinner last year.
So a federal judge who came to this country undocumented, and will be sharing his story as well as the ways for liberation for all people. Come to Elgin Community College on Sunday, September 20th. More information on our website, jfonnic.org. So, thank you very much, Megan, for being on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Any parting comments for us?
I hope that we're seeing some positive steps. Immigration, like our system of immigration in the U.S. has been broken for years, but I really think that we're seeing a lot of good movements. As a lawyer, we can only do so much legally to change a system that is very much needs a whole shift systemically, and that's not something that the law is usually a good tool to address. But it's really exciting to have a lot of movements that are behind immigration reform to really change the policies that have been hurting our communities for a long time.
Yeah, and thank you for your work, and hopefully, some Honduran youngster fleeing a violent environment, possibly fleeing because they identify as trans or bisexual or gay, can find some services here in the country from JFON organizations like yours. This is the Gay Liberation Network. Have a good night.